I've recently become entirely absorbed, for the second time in my life, by what I earnestly believe to be one of the best games I've ever played. And it's this one. No, really, I'm serious. Super Hexagon. It might not look like much, and it really isn't much either, but so fully embracing simplicity is what makes it unexpectedly endearing. I mean, just look at the Steam page, the About This Game section. There's only one sentence describing the game, and that's all it needs. Super Hexagon is a minimal action game by Terry Kavanagh with music by Chipsel. Simple. There's slightly more written there, but it's trivia, like a list of words that rhyme with hexagon. Autobahn, electron, leprechaun. Thanks, Terry. That's very helpful. Before we even talk about Super Hexagon, I wanted you to see Hexagon, the original version of the game made in a single day for Pirate Kart Jam 5 back in 2012. Hexagon can be played directly on Terry Kavanagh's website, except I think Flash dying killed that off. It's on Congregate too, where you can still play Flash games, but when you try it, this happens. So, yeah, not very exciting. The good news is that I'm really good at this version. I beat it on my first try. Yeah. Well, oh well. Back in high school on my phone, I'd play Super Hexagon every single morning before classes began, until I beat the game. And yes, I do think a mobile game is one of the best games I've ever played. I can't believe it either. It took months. It's a game where anytime someone got a glance at my screen, they'd ask what the heck I was even looking at, which is extremely understandable. If I saw someone staring intently at this, I'd be a little curious too. I mean, from a graphics perspective, it's got more in common with the old Windows Media Player visualizations than it does with, video games. But there's so much more about the game that can't be conveyed by simply watching gameplay footage. I'm hoping to convey some of that appeal in this very video, and maybe by the end, you'll love the game just as much as I do. We can get started with the basics of gameplay. I'm sure you can figure this out by watching for like 2 seconds, but you're a triangle, moving around a hexagon, avoiding getting hit. You move left, and you move right. You're probably thinking this looks pretty difficult to follow, and that's the point. The whole game is constantly rotating and pulsating, colors always in flux as an incredible soundtrack just absolutely blares at you. It's sensory overload in the best way possible, forcing you into a state of complete concentration and hijacking your mind of all thoughts except left, right, fuck, and one more try. All while the game endlessly says,
"Game over. Begin. Game over. Begin. Game over."
If you're the sort of person who thinks a game has to be long to be worth your money, Super Hexagon is the cure for what ails you, the counterexample to end all counterexamples. The game can be beaten in 6 minutes, and that's not with some arcane combination of button presses to warp to the ending, that's just with playing well. There's 6 stages, and all you have to do is survive 1 minute in each. But no offense, you won't play well. The game is hard. We're lucky to live in a timeline where this got released as a $3 one-time purchase instead of an arcade game. I mean, this thing is too brutal to even be in an arcade, especially if you don't know what you're doing. You're lasting seconds tops. If each attempt was a quarter, I'd have spent well over $100 to beat the game, and I mean like, well over. Super Hexagon is super hard, but it never feels unfair. I mean, I could see how you might think the entire screen doing a 360-degree rotation would be unfair, but the screen rotating is such a central part of the gameplay, it's always in motion, and when it suddenly does a complete loop-to-loop, it feels more like a good gag than bad design. And once you train your eyes to see through all that visual noise and just play the game like nothing's going on, it feels incredible. And it isn't like each stage is just throwing random nonsense at you. There's a set few patterns on each stage to learn. In a matter of minutes, you should be able to recognize each one, and beyond that, it's just a matter of mastering them. In your average JRPG, bear with me for a second, I am indeed about to compare this to a JRPG, but you'll see what I'm getting at. You level up characters to improve their abilities. You, as a player, fundamentally cannot experience the full satisfaction of improving. The inputs, the actual button presses, and the outputs, the damage your character does, say, are fundamentally disconnected. A basic attack at level 1 does less damage than the same basic attack at level 2, 3, and so on. You push the same button, but the results are different. I'm not about to say level ups are bad as a mechanic, far from it. But I do think there's something to be said for the benefits of having games that minimize the gap between inputs and outputs. Most games these days incorporate RPG mechanics to some extent, and it's fine, you know? But I can't help but feel like something has been lost in that process to RPGify almost everything. Some satisfaction is lost when you can grind out a win instead of having to improve your own skills as a player. This is literally the least modern example I could possibly give, but in Dragon Quest I on the NES, or Dragon Warrior if you're stubborn enough to still be calling it that, you level your character over the course of about 10 hours to take on the Dragon Lord and save the kingdom. If you could fight the Dragon Lord at the start of the game, you would be toasted even if you knew the game like the back of your hand. It almost goes without saying, but the Hexagon game does not have RPG mechanics. If you are good at the game, you can beat it in 6 minutes. Does this make it a better game? Psh, yeah, absolutely. I'm kidding. But also, has this ever happened to you? You try fighting a boss in a game, and you get absolutely destroyed, over and over, so you decide to grind a bit to strengthen your party. You go back to fight the boss again, and suddenly it's way too easy. You did too much grinding and robbed yourself of an interesting gameplay experience. It sucks when that happens. I play games for interesting gameplay experiences. Obviously, this isn't strictly an RPG problem. Many games have difficulty options that might lead players to accidentally rob themselves of a more interesting experience in exchange for smoother progression. Look, I know I'm comparing apples to oranges. Not even. I'm comparing apples to, like, the concept of time. But the broad strokes of what I'm saying here is simply that simplicity satisfies. Super Hexagon doesn't give you the opportunity to cheat yourself out of a good experience. There's just you and 6 unchanging, predictable, yet slightly randomized stages. And the result is wonderful, assuming you can eventually beat it. If you can't, then you just have to leave, forever unsatisfied. I mentioned I beat the game for the first time in high school on my phone, and since it was such a difficult game, I eventually decided I wanted to have the Steam achievements for surviving each stage. Of course, that required playing the entire game again. I started that in 2021 with the first couple of levels, and it has literally been in the back of my mind for the past 3 years, until I did my achievements video. Doing that video, it just felt like the right time to give it one final go, where I wouldn't give up. Winning was just as difficult the second time as the first, but I did eventually beat it. I'm finally free from that feeling of having unfinished business. I can finally move on with my life. I know that the counter-argument to games being difficult with no way of making it easier is that many people won't get the satisfaction of winning. They'll get frustrated and just quit. But I'd like to think that people who think they've forever given up on a game might still come back eventually and still get that satisfaction. Finishing a tough game years later, if anything, makes an incredibly memorable experience, in a way only games can. Anyways, what was I talking about again? Alright, Dragon Quest, it takes about 10 hours, and that's about what it took me to beat Super Hexagon. Look, I love Dragon Quest, but the feeling of satisfaction when I beat the Dragon Lord is peanuts compared to finally hitting 60 seconds on Hexagonist Hyper, the hardest stage in the game. Seriously, going from this stage back to the first makes me feel embarrassed that I ever lost to this. It seems like it's moving in slow motion in comparison. Is that really what it was like all along? And let's talk about that last stage. I'm not pulling on your leg one bit when I say I spent just as much time on the entire rest of the game as I did trying to beat that last level. When I saw this for the first time, my eyes literally could not keep up with it. I had to call it for the day and come back. Even still, the next day, this one pattern where you go right, left. Now that I know how to do it, it's easy to recognize, but before you figure that out, it's almost impossible to parse in the moment. I looked up a YouTube video of somebody else playing it just so I could pause it and see what the screen looked like so I could figure out what to do. Even knowing the handful of obstacle patterns the stage throws at you is far from enough to succeed. Recognizing the patterns and executing them accurately and in time is a bit tricky, to put it mildly. It demands near-perfect play, borderline robotic accuracy. I had play sessions multiple hours long doing nothing but playing this stage over and over. Staring at this for multiple hours straight is meditative in a sense, but you do eventually start to feel like you're going mad just a little bit. There's a voice clip whenever you beat your personal best, and as soon as I hear that, I instantly go into panic mode. 90% of runs barely make it past the 10-second mark, and most of the ones that do end at about 25 seconds. So when I start to notice that I'm doing sort of well, the adrenaline kicks in, I start to focus, but to my detriment. It's like when you think about breathing. I've been doing it on autopilot this whole time, but suddenly I'm thinking about it and now it feels off. So yeah, getting past that feeling is a big part of success. And again, that's not some RPG stat I can level up. That's real-life confidence in myself that I need to have in order to win. Learning to time blinks is a huge help too. I'm not talking about some mechanic I haven't mentioned yet called blinking. I'm talking about the real-life game mechanic that your eyes do. Blink at the wrong time? Dead. Why'd you do that, dummy? You have to be able to recognize a pattern, get yourself in the position to start the pattern, start executing the pattern, then you blink during the execution, since if you're doing it right, you don't actually need to see, and then quickly focus back on the game immediately to get ready for the next obstacle, or you're dead. The game doesn't just demand perfection from pressing left and right on the keyboard, it demands perfection from your entire body. Only for a minute, but it's a wild minute. And when I did hit 60 seconds, especially the first time I played, it just felt like nothing else I've ever experienced from a game. It's a challenge that literally looked impossible, that moved faster than my eyes could keep up with, and yet with enough practice, I could just do it. It's a game that makes the impossible feel possible. Not because of the plot, this thing has as much plot as Tetris. It's a moving finale that shows no challenge is insurmountable because to get there, you faced an insurmountable challenge and prevailed. I hope you play this game and get that very same feeling, because that moment is what solidifies Super Hexagon as one of the most important gaming experiences I've ever had. Speaking of Tetris, other than that you dodge lines in one and make lines in another, Super Hexagon and Tetris actually share a lot of DNA. But I'm sure you've heard other people talk all about Tetris before, and why it's so great. I'm not even going to get into it. What I am going to get into is a game I like even more than Tetris. Tetris Attack. On the Super Nintendo. It's different, I swear. It's actually very different as far as games with Tetris in the title go. Basically, it's Bejeweled, but you can only make horizontal moves, and then add in a constantly rising playfield, and toss in a second player, and garbage-dropping mechanics like Tetris has, and you've got yourself a recipe for a dangerously addictive game. Also, the music is just perfect. Each character has their own song, and Poochie's theme is one of my favorite tracks from the entire Super Nintendo library. And that's saying something. The bass, in particular, is so good, and the birds chirping give it a wholesome, woodsy vibe that pairs perfectly with the background. And just look at Poochie. How could you not love this face? But yeah, Tetris Attack. This is another game I could play for hours and hours, despite being very simple. Unlike Super Hexagon, there are several modes: a play-at-your-own-pace endless mode that's more relaxing, a time trial mode that's more speedy, stage clear mode, which is more survivally, puzzle mode that's more thinky, and versus mode, which actually functions as a story mode where you play against a series of computer opponents. The game has very granular difficulty options, with the speed going from 1 to 99, so playing a long game while the difficulty slowly rises is super satisfying. By the end, it gets so quick that you have to either literally constantly match blocks, or make a combo every like 3 seconds. It demands a lot from you, but like Super Hexagon, finally winning after so many attempts feels incredible. Where Super Hexagon trains your eyes to see through all the visual noise, Tetris Attack trains your eyes to see potential combos among a mess of colored blocks. You slowly get a sense for it as you play, and after enough time, you can just do it without even thinking. And I guess that's all I have to say. I just really like both of these games, and even though they aren't exactly obscure, I think a lot of people might like them if they spent some time playing. Super Hexagon is on Steam for cheap, and the original Japanese version of Tetris Attack, Panel de Pan, is on Nintendo Switch Online, if you want to check it out. But instead of Yoshi, it's a bunch of anime ladies, so it's definitely missing a little bit of charm if you ask me. But, you know, it's still the same game overall. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one. Bye!